Today we're looking at a Vauxhall Corsa. It's a 2010 year model, makes it about 12 years old, and it's got just over 100,000 miles on the clock. So the issue with this car, the customers complain about, is the handbrake doesn't hold very well on a slope, and it does come up a little bit higher than normal. I'm going to first off crack these wheel nuts loose. We'll take the wheel and the drum off and have a look at what's going on in there. Now, as I mentioned, the handbrake does actually come up quite a long way and it isn't very good. A good thing to check on these Corsas, give that a wriggle, pull that up, and you'll find the handbrake cable and adjuster. Now you can see by the amount of thread sticking through there, this has been adjusted up on the cables quite a lot already. So my feelings are that the rear shoes have been running low for a long time and somebody's continuously been tweaking up the handbrake on here. So I think it's a good idea at this stage to de-adjust this before we start pulling apart the rear brakes. You'll need a 10mm, deep 10mm socket and a ratchet. Don't go too far and take it off the end of the thread. As you can see, that was quite a lot of adjustment. So that, now the lever is completely sloppy and the cable is free. We can have a look at the rear brakes, see what we find. So before we either jack the car up or lift the car up on the ramp, whatever you're using, we need to crack these wheel nuts loose. Here's the locking wheel nut key, which you will need for one nut on each wheel, if it's got locking wheel nuts fitted to it. Most cars nowadays do. That's it. There we go. Right, I'm just going to raise the ramp up now to a working height. So when you lift the car, like we've done on the ramp here, or jack the car, you can use the same points. So I've put a block of wood here underneath the lip of the sill panel, which is a very strong point on the car, and you can see that little cutout there. That's where the jack supplied with the car is supposed to go if you've got a puncture out on the road. So that shows that's a good point for lifting. And you've got similar on the front, and the other side is identical, of course. So wheel nuts already cracked loose. Support the wheel, otherwise it'll fall off and bounce, hit you in the kneecap. As you can see, this brake drum has got two little grub screws, Torx 30. Always a good idea to give them a whack with a hammer first, just to shock them and free off any rust in there. As you can see, I'm using my gun, but you can use a ratchet with a Torx bit in it, whatever you've got to hand. Give the drum another tap. These do rust up. You can see it kind of jumped there loose. And more often than not, where the shoes wear into the drum, it creates a lip around the edge, which can make it a bit tight to get off of the shoes. That one's not too bad actually. You can see it's been ground off previously. So that's quite handy. So looking at the shoes, you can see the lining material here is quite thick. Around here it does get quite a bit thinner and thicker at the bottom. So it's worn a little bit unevenly there. It's not too bad. The hydraulic wheel cylinder here, so when you put your foot on the brake, pushes out a piston each side to push the shoes out against the drum. It's a good idea just to make sure that's free. You can push both sides in with a screwdriver. There you go. That's free. That's not seized. That's good. Your handbrake cable comes in over here, runs down, goes through the back, comes out again here. You can see it with a spring on it and hooks into an arm on the shoe. So when you pull your handbrake lever, that pulls the arm and the shoe goes out and presses against your drum. I've done the same procedure on the driver's side, and immediately I can see this shoe lining here is very low. So I would recommend a new set of shoes. The other side is okay, but it's not brilliant. So we will crack on now and show you how to dismantle the shoes. Okay, so you might need an assistant for this part. I'm just operating the handbrake lever to make sure the cable operates smoothly and it returns back to where it should be. So we're going to remove the shoes. We've tried the handbrake and it is quite normal to see only one shoe moving with the drum off. Once the drum's on, that will hold that shoe still and the other one is forced to move as well. So we know the cables are operating smoothly, they're not seized. I'm going to remove this wheel hub, which is also got the bearing in it. To do that, you need to take this cap off first, which is just held on. You should be able to tap it off carefully with a screwdriver or a chisel. It'll probably ping off in a minute. Ah, there you go. Inside there, I believe it's a 32mm nut. It might be a 30. No, that's it, 32. Yeah, that's quite tight. These are roughly 150 to 160 Newton meters. There we go. You can do the brake shoes without taking this off, but being as it's just one nut, it gives you so much more space to work. They're not taper roller bearings, they're a sealed wheel bearing unit, which is why the nut is done up so tight. The older taper roller bearings, you only ever done the nut up finger tight. You don't really see that nowadays. There we go, and there's a little washer. So that's your, you can see the bearing in there. believe you have to replace the whole thing when you're changing a bearing, so it's not too bad a job, but a little bit more costly, where you used to be able to knock the bearings out and change them. Anyway, that's off, out of the way. Now we've got quite a few springs here. It's sometimes a good idea to take a picture with your mobile phone just to refer back to. Alternatively, there's always the other side. I'd recommend just dismantling one side, putting it all back together. You can double check with the other side. First of all, I'm going to try and remove these clips, which you need to squash in. There's a pin in the middle which goes right through, so I'll put my finger behind it to hold it still. Wriggle that out. There's the pin, a bit rusty but still does its job. You can see that sits in there when it's all together. Exactly the same there. The next thing I'm going to do, you can use, a lot of people use side cutters or snips to get hold of the spring and pull them off of there, but the easiest way to get the bottom one off is just put a screwdriver behind the shoe, lever it out round to one side, and that takes off the tension. Try and load them all out up here in order. And the top, there we go. And you see there's a clip of some sort there holding the cable in. Not one that I'm that familiar with. Ah. Well, that was easy, he said. That's quite a clever little idea. So the cable goes through and you push that down, the spring holds it in place, and once the cable's there it can't lift back out again until it's been detensioned like so. So now we've got the shoes off. I need to take off the adjuster here. We've got another spring there, pulling it all together. There we go. There's your handbrake shoe. One spring, one adjuster. So at this stage I will de-adjust it a bit because the new shoes are going to have a thicker friction surface on there, and we want them to be able to fit in there nicely and the drum to go over them. If you leave it where it is, you'll struggle to get the drum back on. Before I start putting the shoes back on, I just want to make sure there's no loose debris in here. Give it a little clean off. Then use the brake cleaner just to give it a good soaking really, and you let all the muck run off the bottom. There we go. That does dry fairly quickly by itself, but I'll get a bit of glue roll. And what I'm going to do is put a little dab of grease on each of the contact points for the brake shoes. It does help to stop squeak and squeal. So copper slip, just got a pot here with an old brush in it. I need a little bit on there. These are always fiddly to get the shoes back on due to the amount of springs. So try not to get any copper slip on your shoes when you're rebuilding it, but if you do, just get a bit of brake cleaner and a bit of cloth and clean it off. There we go, just the copper slip grease. And now it's ready to start rebuilding. So on this original shoe, you may recall there was a little fix in here which I was quite surprised to see, to hold the cable in place. So the cable actually went through this way, and then that little part there flipped down and stopped it sliding out. Now what you usually see is what's on these aftermarket shoes. You can see the gap here is a lot narrower than that, so the head of the cable won't fit through here. This is what you usually find. So when I refit the cable, just lay it over the top, drop it down the back there, and it sits underneath this little notch, so it can't come back up and it can't come out. I have double checked with the motor factors, and they say these are the only shoes they list for this vehicle, and to be fair, that's the only way I've seen the cable fitted previously. So I'll carry on now and start rebuilding the shoes. So we're now going to put the handbrake cable back in the lever arm on the shoe. As you can see, that just literally drops down in there, which is, as I said, the normal way to fit a cable. And there is a tiny little hole in the back of the end of the cable there, which that locates into. I guess it could go around there. That's it. Now we've got the handbrake cable in place. As you can see, this is going to be very tricky with one pair of hands and the springs and everything. So I like to take the securing clip, the pin rather, put it back through the hole, put the shoe in place, and then see if I can get the clip back in without blinding myself. That's it. It's quite tricky because you've got to compress this spring clip to get it to go underneath the head of that pin. But now that's held in place, hopefully I can get the other shoe, the adjuster mechanism, the top spring and the lower spring all fitted. So I've got the clip back on. I've just twisted it round so it's pointing downwards just to keep it nice and neat. You often find them at all different angles when you take it apart. I don't think it's too important, but I like to have it round so it's out of the way of everything else. Now I've got the other shoe here, which I've started. I've just slid the adjuster back on and put the spring back in there. Now this could go wrong. This is always a tricky one to do. So basically you need to get the spring in there, then you can stretch it a bit and hopefully get this adjuster over. There we go. Push the piston in on there. There, that's it. That's the worst part done. Now I need to try and fit the pin and clip on this shoe to hold it in place. Well, actually, I will put the lower spring on next while it's still floating around. You can hook that over, pull the shoe over. There we go. That's under tension. So take the pin, put that through the back plate. There it is. And now the fun part. There it goes. That's it. And that's pretty much assembled now. I need to put the hub back on I will actually put a smear of copper grease around this stub here, just to ease the bearing sliding back on. We'll get the hub back on, take the drum, place that over the shoes and do some adjustments. So we're going to put the hub back on, not forgetting this washer spacer which came off, so that goes on first. Something else to be careful of, mindful of, you can see there this plastic part is actually your ABS sensor, and it is only plastic. It wouldn't take much to snap it, so just got to be mindful and a bit careful of that when you're working in this area, not to damage it. That actually picks up around the edge of this part here, which looks like a seal. There are teeth underneath there, so it counts the teeth as the wheel rotates, and if it suddenly doesn't count any more teeth, if your wheel locks up, that's when your ABS cuts in. So just be a little bit mindful of that. So this needs to go on nice and square and straight, which can be a bit of a wriggle sometimes. That's it. That's gone in. The bearings slid back over. So now the nut back in. There is a torque figure of, as I've previously mentioned, 150 to 160 Newton meters on this, which, as you notice when I try to undo it, that is very tight. So if you've got a torque wrench, it's worth putting that on there, torquing it up. I'm just going to come round and leave on this. Not everybody's got a torque wrench, so nice and tight. Give that one more go. That's it, that'll be fine. Lovely. Put the grease cap back on to protect the bearing. That's it. Now the rear drum, which is all clean. You need to line up the two grub screws eventually. You don't really need to at this point, because we just want to make sure we can get the adjustment right on the shoes. So that's gone on and is spinning very easily. I did wind the adjuster back in when it was apart, so that's going to need adjusting out a little bit now. This is the adjuster wheel here. It's got teeth on it, a bit like barbs. You turn it one way and there is a little leg underneath, which I should have shown you earlier. It's a little bit difficult to see, but underneath there is a little flat piece of metal which rests on these teeth. It only allows you to turn it one way to adjust up. If you go too far, you'll need a little screwdriver just under here to lift that little leg off of the wheel, which will allow you to de-adjust it. But I'm going to go ahead and click that up a little bit. It can be a bit fiddly. That's the way it needs to go on this particular one. It will only turn one way, as I said. No, that still needs more adjusting. getting tighter. That's probably very close to where we need to be. I'll just see if I can lever it a little bit more. Fraction more. I'd say that's about right. You've got it so the shoes are just rubbing, but it can still be turned easily. Now you can line up those grub screws just by turning this hub. There they are. So I'll put those back in. They should pull the drum back on straight. Might need a little tap. Give it a little tap. That can centralise the shoes. I know that sounds a bit odd, but that's just about right. It's not too tight, it spins freely. The shoes are right on the edge of the drums, making contact. So I'll carry on, do the other side exactly the same, and then we will get the wheels on. Okay, so get the wheel back on. I need to line up those bolt holes. I'm using a deep socket because the bolts are quite recessed in these wheels and it's a little bit difficult to do with just your fingers. As you can see, they go in a long way, a bit tricky to turn them. You can do it, but if you've got a socket to hand, it's a lot easier. And the locking one. So I'm just gently going to do them up with the air gun. Now we will drop the ramp down to the floor. So it may not have been clear, but I've done exactly the same on the driver's side as this side. The wheel is back on. We're just checking up on the tightness of these nuts. There is a torque setting, as I keep saying, around about 110 Newton meters, but you just need to be sensible. You kind of get a feel for it when they're tight enough. The locking one I'd never do quite as tight as the standard nuts because, as I've previously mentioned, you really don't want to be shearing off that part in there. Okay, so job is done. Wheels and drums are all back on. The pedal is good. The handbrake lever is much better. So there's no need to do any further final tweaking up on the nut adjuster on the cable. I'll clip this cover back into place. I'm happy with that. Give the car a road test. Maybe make sure it holds when you stop on a hill, although the handbrake won't be brilliant for a little while until the shoes have bedded in, so really you need to tell the customer it's going to take maybe 100, 200 miles, then you may have to tweak it slightly on the cable, but see how it goes.